Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Welcome to Magic in the Room. My name is Ben West.
And I'm Hannah Bratterud, and I'm thrilled to have Ben, our producer, as my co-host today. And I'm also really excited for our guest today, Kevin Strauss. Kevin, it's great to have you on the podcast. We've talked about this for a while. You and I have known each other for, a few years now, right?
Yeah, since 2019.
That sounds about right. That was the first time I went to Sarah Elkin's No Longer Virtual conference. Sarah's been on the podcast here a couple times. And in fact, No Longer Virtual is coming up in March or happening in March. I'm not sure exactly when this episode comes out, but if you're so interested, go look that up. But Kevin, we're here to talk about you and a new book that you have, and it's a super interesting topic on innovation. Just to give a little background, I'll kind of share your bio here. Kevin loves solving problems. He's earned over 75 patents and published more than 10 peer-reviewed papers across multiple industries. He's earned 2 industry awards for innovation, and Kevin's ideas have helped save lives around the world and generate billions of dollars in revenue. Kevin believes everyone can innovate, and he teaches the diverse array of people in organizations and schools how to strengthen the foundational areas of their business. So I am just excited to have you on. As I mentioned, we've met a few years ago, had some really interesting conversations over the years that we've known each other. And I've been wanting you to have you on the podcast for a while. So I'm glad it worked out today. And this is just such a cool topic, one that I'm personally really interested in. So with that, Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. All right. So most of us say we want to encourage creativity and innovation in our organizations for businesses to really stay competitive, having innovative solutions, being able to innovate on ideas, on products is really critical to being competitive in the marketplace. However, innovation doesn't just happen, or does it? There's a few things that need to be in place. So what does it take to foster an environment that makes room for creativity and innovation?
Yeah, well, so, it doesn't just happen, like you said. And even in the book, I mentioned this, where I've never, I've been in working for 30 years now in my career, and I've never been to a brainstorming, I'm air quoting, the brainstorming session that's scheduled on like Tuesday from 4 to 6 p.m. or 3 to 5 p.m., where we're going to come up with the next industry changing idea, and it's going to happen in that 2-hour period. We're going to get all the minds together. I've never seen that. I mean, maybe it's happened, but I've never been a part of that. And I've been doing this for a long time. I think it's pretty rare to be able to really dictate or plan innovation. And the real key, I think, is to get the environment, which can also be translated and said as the culture of an organization, a school, a group of people, and creating the right environment where innovation can happen, and where it can happen freely, and where it can happen at any time, and you can take advantage of that. And it just seems like, sure, the management wants all of their people to innovate and tackle these problems and and creatively solve problems and come up with creative solutions. But it ends there. They demand that kind of behavior, but they don't do anything beyond that to actually set the environment or the right conditions to foster that innovation.
Yeah. So understanding what drives behavior, I think, is really key, right? And it's one of the things we talk about on this podcast quite a bit too, bringing in the neuroscience, but also understanding the complexities of behavior and human behavior, right? Learning to influence behavior, both our own and that of our people in our organizations. And so what I love about this book is that you create this, you show the connection between emotional health and innovation and why emotional health matters. And we've talked about before here on the podcast why emotion matters so much, because it is the driver of all of our behavior. The actions that we do take and the actions we don't take are all influenced and directly impacted by our emotional states. So we'll get into that a little bit down the further into the conversation. But first, Ben, I'd love to hear from you about, what was it about Kevin's book that really stood out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really appreciate and really connect, Kevin, with a lot of the ideas that you have in this book. And so, I thought an interesting starting point, question that I had was just, why do people skip steps? So my background is in graphic design. And at some point I realized that my interest in graphic design wasn't about making pretty things on the paper. It was a tool for solving problems. And so this idea of define the problem, that's the first area in the book, define the problem. To me, that's very intuitive. And, you said people kind of demand creativity, but they don't do anything to create that environment. So where did we get this idea that we can just turn it on, turn it off, not define the problem first, not do the steps?
I'm not exactly sure where the idea came from first, but you got to go through the process. And I think one of the key reasons why I've been able to solve so many problems is because I'm really good at dialing down to the root cause. Mm-hmm. What is the real problem? And I think what happens is too often we think we know what the problem is. For example, the problem is somebody drinks too much alcohol, that's the problem. Well, that's not really the problem. Mm-hmm. And I won't go into that, unless it comes up later maybe, but that's the behavior. And the behavior is not the problem. The behavior is just the symptom of a deeper problem. And sometimes you have to ask why, not just 5 times, but maybe 7, 8, 10, 15 times before you really dial down to the true root problem. Why do we not start there and really dig down? I could guess, I could hypothesize as why that might happen. One idea could be that, we want to get a solution, and I'll put this right back to the emotional health component and state of emotional health that Hannah was talking about, which I really like the way you phrase that, because it's not just about having emotions, it's your state of emotional health, and there's a difference. But I think that we want to solve that problem quicker, faster, because we want to add value. We want to be heard, we want to add value. And if I solved a problem, I have a lot of value. And value in our brain basically translates to worthiness of love or feeling loved. And love is a basic human need. And I don't get really deep into that in the book. That'll be my next book. But that need to be loved, to have a sense of belonging, to your organization or to your class, let's say, is so primal. It's a basic human need, just like air and water and food and sleep and shelter. And those 6 needs with love, I feel like pretty much everything in life boils down to those 6 basic needs. And if we're not solving a problem, I talk about this later in the book. For me, if I'm missing the target, if I try something and I miss it 2 or 3 times, I got to take a step back, because I'm like, wait a minute. If I'm this far off the mark still, then I probably have not defined the root problem. And when we talk about something like the war on drugs, which has been going on for 100 years now, we just haven't addressed the root problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Hannah and I, before you came on, we were talking a little bit about kind of the myth of the like solo innovator. Like we kind of have this myth of, Edison invented the light bulb all by himself, sitting in the garage.
He was just sitting alone in his garage,
right.
tinkering, and all these incredible innovations just happened out of his brain.
Right. Which is not true at all. And so what I was thinking about as you were saying that was that, we kind of have built up this myth of people who do that, like they turn it on, turn it off, they do it by themselves. And so like, if we want to be appreciated, we better be like the myth, but it's not reality. Like that myth isn't real, and you can't actually do it that way. You have to do this innovation in community, like you talk about in your book. You have to do it in the context of being emotionally healthy, those things that you talk about. To me, like the first, like reading those things is pretty profound to start making some of those connections.
It's just really, if I didn't have so many amazing people around me and feel so safe to share the stupidest ideas ever at any given time of day or night, if I didn't have anybody to bounce those ideas off of, then I'm just working in a vacuum. And honestly, there's so much I'm going to miss. There's so much. I mean, there was one time, I think I told a short story of this in the book, because so many stories, right? They just zipping through my head. But I remember I had commuted to work, and I've been thinking about some problem. And in this 75-minute commute to work, I had worked out this whole solution and what we're going to do. And I had the whole design figured out. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like this is going to change everything. Right. And I get to work. I don't even know how I got to work that day. Right. Like my mind was just in a whole different place, but somehow I drove, 65 miles, 75 minutes to the office. And I get to the office and I go right to the whiteboard. I don't even take my coat off. And I start drawing on it. I'm like, Larry, that's my, designer on my team. Like, you got to check this out. And I draw this whole thing. It takes me like 10 minutes to really make it nice and draw this whole sketch and everything out. And he's like, yeah, but what about that right there? What's going on there? And I'm like, oh man, this totally doesn't work. And I just erase the whole thing and we just go about our day.
Yeah.
It was a terrible idea. It just was a total flop. I thought it was amazing.
So there's other people are necessary for the creative process, right? And when I was in graduate school in the organizational dynamics program with my co-hosts, Luke and Chris, one of my favorite classes ever in that program was about creativity and innovation. And so it's a subject I've been really interested in, and, what creates, what allows us to be creative? What is creativity? Are some people born with it and some people not? Is it a skill that can be taught? And yes, it's absolutely a skill that can be taught, right?
I believe that fully.
I do too. And Teresa Amabile, who's one of the primary researchers on creativity, actually has a 3-component model where, the 3 things that are necessary for creativity to occur are, expertise. So domain, subject matter expertise, you have to know something about a subject or a topic or a product or whatever, whatever the domain is, in order to be able to innovate on it. So you need to understand it, right? And we talked about mastery, what leads to mastery. Malcolm Gladwell has the 10,000 hours model, right? That in general, or on average, it takes 10,000 hours of practice to really master something. So having the expertise,
which is about 5 years if you're working full time.
Yeah. Exactly. And so
that's a long time.
that is a long time. And so you get, those are skills that you learn, though, the domain expertise, right? And to practice and get that level of mastery. Then you have to have the second component is creative thinking skills. So how do we think creatively? How do we engage, divergent thinking and different thinking styles in order to create? And that is also a skill that can be learned. Actually, our textbook was written by a guy named Keith Sawyer, and he has another book that's a little more digestible, but it's called Zigzag, and it really goes into the creative process. And that one is not an academic book, but it's Zigzag: The Surprising Path to Greater Creativity. And he has a model and a step, different steps and processes that are involved, and those are really those creative thinking skills. And then the third component of the model that Teresa Amabile has put forth is motivation. And when it comes to, what is it that creates that motivation to create? And Kevin, you started alluding to that, right? The relationships, that's really where the emotional health component is so important. Is, do we even have the motivation to try to share our ideas or to have ideas in the first place, and then to act on them and put them out into the world? Do we feel safe enough to do that? So talk to us a little bit about, what is it about our relationships that enable innovation?
Yeah. So, relationships are everything, I think. From what I've learned over the last 20 years of digging into emotional health and human behavior. So 20 years, right? I got about 20,000 hours in this, for whatever that's worth. Relationships are just basic to our species, even primates or mammals, really, and the social connection. And we hear a lot about social connection. We hear a lot about mental and emotional health. We hear a lot about emotional intelligence, and psychological safety and things like that. But I would like to really define it, back to what we were talking about earlier about defining the problem. And the definition that I use for emotional health is rather different than what most people use. And just in a comparison, emotional intelligence, or EQ, emotional intelligence quotient, if you look up a definition for emotional intelligence, it's really about recognizing and managing your emotions, right? Because we're going to have a whole, gambit of emotions, and how do we manage those emotions? That's all well and good, and I'm a huge fan of that. But emotional health, to me, comes before emotional intelligence. Why are we having that emotion in the first place? What's triggering that emotion? Because we can all have every emotion, but what's triggering the emotion in the first place? Which leads me to the definition that I really like for emotional health, which is a person's ability to give and receive love. Love, connection, a sense of belonging. If you want to go to Maslow's theory of human motivation, and notice I didn't say hierarchy of needs.
Yep, I did notice.
Specifically, right?
Yeah.
Because Maslow's so I dig deep, right? What's the root problem? What's really going on? Maslow did not come up with the hierarchy of needs. Maslow did not come up with the pyramid. Mm-mm. He wrote the paper in 1943 for the theory of human motivation. The hierarchy of needs in the pyramid came from a couple of marketers that distilled what Maslow was saying into this really easy to understand pyramid. But the hierarchy, it's not a straight linear do this, then that, then this, then that. You actually bounce between all these motivational needs at any given time in your life. You might be working on just getting, water right now, one day, but the next day you're really working on your self-esteem. And the next day you're looking for safety and shelter. For example, when 9/11 happened, we are way off topic here, sorry. But when 9/11 happened, I watched, and the whole country, the whole United States dropped down to this need for safety. Everybody. And then I was watching, and about 6 weeks later, we were right back to not loving and connecting and feeling safe, or we felt safe again. And we were right back to like, you cut me off in traffic, and that was my, loaf of bread, not yours, and, all that kind of stuff. So, we came back. But so help me get back on topic here. So emotional health is a person's ability to give and receive love, connection, and belonging. And just for more definitions, to me, mental health, I define mental health as a person's ability to think clearly, focus, concentrate, perform cognitive tasks. So your mental health is really that frontal lobe, your reasoning and decision-making skills, but your emotional health is there in your midbrain, like your amygdala. It's in your midbrain, which is far more basic. If you've got your reptilian brain, your mammalian brain, and your human brain, emotional health is rooted in your midbrain, which engages, orders of magnitude faster than your frontal lobe and your thinking brain.
Yeah.
So now, of course, thinking can influence emotions, emotion influence thinking. They all interrelate, but your emotional health and feeling love and belonging is far more basic than, this cognitive processing and decision and reasoning that goes on in your frontal lobe.
I think this is such a fascinating topic, Kevin, and it reminds me of there's a TEDx talk by neuroscientist Dr. Matthew Lieberman. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called The Social Brain and Its Superpowers. And he actually, and he's a leading neuroscientist, and he proposes that, Maslow's hierarchy had it backwards, right? Yeah, the hierarchy has been attributed to Maslow, but you're correct. He's not the one who drew the pyramid. He didn't. He came up with a theory behind it and the different needs that we have, right, as humans. Mm-hmm. But what Matthew Lieberman proposes is that the two, it says that our physical needs are the most basic need, and that social needs are higher on the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't have food and shelter, we would die. Now, right. In this talk,
right. So if you're dead, nothing else matters. So,
right, exactly.
So be it.
But here's the thing. So one of the superpowers is our need for social connection, and the fact that mothers will feel physical pain when their child is crying, because a human infant actually cannot provide their own physical needs, food, shelter, and all of those things. They are 100% dependent on a caregiver who cares enough about them and meeting their needs that they will take care of them and meet those physical needs. So we could theorize that the emotional connection of love and belonging, and a definition for love that I like too is emotional connection. That's one of the newer definitions of what is this feeling of love that we're experiencing. It's emotional connection. So when we feel emotionally connected to someone else, we care about them. But as infants, we were 100% dependent on another human being for our survival. And that need for belonging and social connection never goes away. And it still is one of our most important needs, arguably above. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of our most basic needs that enables us to get those other things.
Yeah, definitely. So building on that, it's really funny how, again, with Maslow's original theory of human motivation and the TED Talk that you were talking about, granted, if you're dead, right, then nothing else matters. Okay. Sure. But even with that said, how often will a person forego some of their physical needs because of their emotional needs? For example, how many of us have seen TV and movies where a person, let's say Ross Geller, from Friends, will fly to London and stand out in the cold, rain, waiting for Emily, was it, to come home. So he was willing to forego shelter and warmth, and he didn't eat for a while because he was out there, or drink for a while because he was out there for hours and hours and hours. We are willing to forego our physical needs when our emotional need, when we're feeling so much emotional pain. And it's not mental. It's not about his thinking ability or his ability to, concentrate and perform cognitive tasks. He was in so much emotional pain, that unrequited love, that he was willing to forego these physical needs.
Yeah.
Right? Or how often have we been like dumped by our, girlfriend or boyfriend, and we don't eat or sleep for a few days?
It's happened to me.
Right? So, the needs, it's not just a straight hierarchy at all. And I love what you brought up about the baby, because I talk about this all the time. And we were talking earlier about some of these myths that we still subscribe to. Well, one that I think that we're really struggling with a lot, and this is the whole self-help industry, really. I'm generalizing. I'm a big generalizer. But we're under this understanding that you have to love yourself before you can love anyone else. I mean, it's basically a fact, right? We all know this. This is a truth. We all know this. You have to love yourself before you can love anyone else, right? Totally false. 100% absolutely wrong. But it's a myth we still subscribe to today. And the reason it's wrong is because, just like you were saying, a baby relies on its mother, caretaker, let's just say parent, to keep it alive. And a baby, or 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, knows nothing about self-love. They're not self-aware. A person is not self-aware until at least 6 or 7 years old, when they're just becoming self-aware. So we know nothing about self-love as a baby, but for that first 6 years of life, you know the love of your parent, or not the love of your parent. So if you don't learn what love is, or what healthy love is, then you're going to struggle to give it to others and to yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. One last point is, I'll make the caveat that as an adult, you can work on both at the same time, self-love and love and connection with others.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. Even if you think of that parent, right? Most every parent feels a sense of love and emotional connection with their child, whether or not they have learned to love themselves. They'll still have that, right? And I do think anything that we're going to learn to do well, unless we see it modeled and understand what it looks like, it's really hard to do it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Ben, I'm curious to hear your thoughts as you hear this conversation. What does this spark for you? And you have young children too, so.
Yeah. I was just kind of keep thinking about, kind of back to the myth that we were talking about earlier, that, because another myth is sort of the that all poetry is kind of comes out of pain, which I think that there's probably something to that. But it seems, though, that Kevin, like in your book, you're kind of arguing that, like, to really create that environment of innovation, like, we kind of need to let go of some of those ideas and really focus on, like, are we healthy enough to be able to do this innovation that we need? And so, I think sometimes probably like pain and need, like all of that stuff might drive us to innovation. Like, it's there, but you have to have those relationships and that health around you to be able to build those things. So I don't know, I guess I'm kind of curious, how do you balance those two things of, like, the person who's desperate, and because of their desperation, they come up with some sort of innovation, compared to like somebody who's really healthy and is able to innovate? Or are they really actually both healthy? They're just in different environments. Yeah.
That saying of need is the mother of all innovation. How does that play in here?
Well, I agree that a a lot of behaviors, I think most behaviors are coming out of pain and lack of love. What I mostly talk about in the book is really about love. It's, and so it is said that love is the highest frequency that a person can resonate at. And that's really what was happening with so many of these, with most all of these innovations was love. Now there was pain in that, we felt really bad for, I remember when my colleague Caroline Commerstead, Caroline Wyrick, now Commerstead, she was showing me an X-ray that a surgeon had shared with her of a 12-year-old girl who had spinal rods in her back, 2 rods of 5.5 millimeter diameter cobalt chrome, which is a really stiff, rigid metal. And she had broken both of those rods, and none of the screws failed. None of the screws pulled out of the bone, the vertebral bodies, but the rods broke. And Caroline and the doctor felt so much pain for that little girl, that 12-year-old girl. Now, she was experiencing physical pain, but the surgeon and Caroline were experiencing an emotional pain. Like, they didn't want this trauma to happen to this little girl. I have a connection to both Caroline and the surgeon, Dr. Bawachi out of New York, amazing surgeon. I wanted to help them. And it's my love for them and my desire to solve problems, which helps me feel valued and needed and valued, which again translates to love, feeling loved. It all works together. And then that's when this next innovation came to be, because of this love that we have for each other and wanting to not see someone else in pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And I use that phrase a lot. I think there's an element of love for the work itself too, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I'm always, one of the things I'm so grateful for in my life is that I get to do really meaningful work that I care about and that has an impact on other people with people that I love and care about. Right? That is what makes meaningful work and what enables me to be able to live my purpose every day. And that's, I think we would all be grateful to have that kind of environment, right? Where we love what we do enough to constantly look at ways to improve it and make it more interesting or more useful. And then love the people that it impacts ultimately.
Oh, absolutely. And if I can build on what you said about purpose, the work that you do in helping others and it really fuels you and your purpose, to me, that is the definition of spiritual health. And I know that the common definition of spiritual health and spirituality tends to be very focused and centered around religion and God or some higher being, some higher power. I do not subscribe to that definition at all. In fact, I feel like that definition very much discriminates against people who don't have your same religion or don't believe in your same God or don't see God the same way as you. I mean, I'm a complete and total atheist. I don't believe in the concept of God. So are you telling me I cannot be spiritual because I don't believe in God? Well, forget you. I mean, I could be just as spiritual as the next person. Yeah. So for me, the definition for spiritual health, and if we're talking about total well-being, which is really what drives innovation as well and life, my definition for spiritual health is your ability to know and pursue your purpose in life. Yeah. What nurtures you at your core, your essence, your soul, the spirit of Hannah, the spirit of Ben. What gets you out of bed each day? And if whatever gets you out of bed each day, that is nurturing your spirit. That is what nurtures your spiritual health. And if what gets you out of bed each day is to serve God, then great, go do that. I think that's wonderful, right? You're doing what really matters to you. But that's not what matters to me. So I'm going to go do something different. And that's what nurtures me at my core. And it just doesn't discriminate against, a God, a religion, or anything. It's all inclusive, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's really powerful. And so I wanted to make sure we called out the title of the book. We've been talking about the book a lot, but it is called Innovate the 1%, 7 Areas to Nurture for Success. And so we've talked about some of those areas to nurture, right? Really clearly understand, in Ben's words, in order to solve a problem, you have to first define the problem. So defining the root problem. And then we talked about relationships, and you say, Kevin, the stronger your personal relationships, the more freely you'll share ideas, which can lead to innovation. And then we've talked about subject matter expertise. That's the third practice here, or the third area to nurture, building our skills and getting that mastery in our subject area. And then the fourth practice is about having experience in other subject areas so you can mix and match ideas to innovate in your area. And that's another, that cross-pollination of ideas where you see something in one domain and you have an idea for how it can apply in your domain, right? And that leads to so many new innovative ideas in a field when we can take something from a seemingly completely unrelated area, but we can apply it. And so I thought that was another interesting area to nurture. And then we have the more you can break through limiting beliefs. And that's a powerful one, right? That's the fifth area to nurture. So whether those limiting beliefs are imposed by you, by people in your life or your industry, the more likely you'll be to solve problems if you're able to break through those and innovate what others have struggled. So when we talk about spiritual health too, it's a lot about our beliefs and, what do we believe about ourselves and our own agency? Ben, you introduced us to Dr. Chan Hellman, who is a leading hope researcher. And he talks about hope as the belief that the future can be better than today and that I have the power to make it so. So I would, suggest then that hope is also really necessary for innovation to happen, right? Having that belief that the future can be better and that I have the power to make that happen. Ben, any other thoughts when it comes to these different, we've talked about 5 of these areas of to nurture for innovation, and anything else that sparks for you?
Not specifically. I think for me, like kind of the next question is, like, what are the practices that I have to put in place for me to make these things real? Like, how do I make this happen? And like, as a leader, like, how do you nurture these 7 areas? So I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about is how do you apply it?
Yeah, let's go there and let's talk about, what is necessary for how can leaders foster environment and cultures in their organizations that make room for creativity and innovation. So let me just finish up with the last 2 areas to nurture, and then we can talk about some specific ways to nurture them inside an organization. The 6th one is about allowing yourself the freedom to go off task and access your subconscious mind. And we've talked about in the past here, we had an episode on the Healthy Mind Platter, which is a concept from neuroleadership about the 7 mental activities that the brain needs in order to be healthy. And some of them really mirror a few of the concepts here in your book, Kevin. But a big one is playtime, and downtime is another one, right? because focus time is one of the most used and overused mental activities that we use as adults, right? And we feel like we have to be focused all the time. And it's like spending our capital, right? Without depositing anything back. When we're always trying to focus, we end up being very unfocused. So in order to have focus available to us when we need it, there are all these other practices, that are about doing nothing or about play. And play is another very important part of creativity. If you study, creative processes, playing with ideas, playing with concepts. And then you talk about, Kevin, going off task, right? So allowing yourself to
just playing, literally just playing.
Yeah. And what are some of the other areas, Kevin, that, that creates that space for new aha moments or like flashes of insight?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like I'm just a big kid, when I'm working with the team and we're at the office and discussing all these, ideas and problems and trying to improve like spinal procedures and so on. And I'll tell you, I had like 2 giant whiteboards in my office, like almost like 4x8. They were like 5x7, 2 5x7 foot whiteboards. Like that's a lot of space to like write and play on. And on one of them, we just had all these fun quotes from cartoons, from Seinfeld, from, whatever, just because it was just fun. We were just having fun. And at any given time, we might be digging deep into a problem or trying to, to design a new pedicle screw or whatever it is. But then, I'm talking about the dinner that I had last night and how, I was with my family over the weekend and we got into this huge laughing attack for like 20 minutes. And then now we're all laughing at the office. I mean, have you ever been in your office environment and gotten into like a 10-minute laugh attack where you're sweating and crying and coughing and choking because you're laughing so hard? How often does that happen at the office? Pretty rare, right? Yeah. but that's the kind of environment I tend to create or be a part of. We're just having a good time. I'm bringing up videos on YouTube, once YouTube became a thing, because I've been around long enough that it wasn't. But, bringing up YouTube videos of the Flintstones back, as like, oh, I remember when this happened or that happened, or, and that's the playtime, it's just, but interweaving it, interweaving it directly into, oh, I've got this implant I'm working on. And now we're talking about the Flintstones. And now I'm talking about, how I was training for triathlon and I totally bonked, right. And now I want to solve that problem, bonk, hitting the wall, low blood sugar. All this stuff is just flying around. And then you just grab onto whatever it is that serves your purpose for whatever you're trying to solve, in the moment. And that's the play. It's literal playtime.
Kevin, I'm curious, have you seen that kind of like spontaneous play in conversations, like ways to replicate that in Zoom world? Because I think that Zoom world like tends to make us so like we come in with an agenda, we do the agenda because it's the half hour on our calendar. So I mean, that's kind of the world we live in right now. We're doing this Zoom thing, even for this podcast. So like, how do you replicate that spontaneity and that ability to go off topic in Zoom world?
That is a great question, because I feel like in the Zoom world, it's, conversations are so much more formalized. I can see the little yellow box around my window when I have the floor, and I don't want to cut someone else off and to deal with the way microphones and speakers with duplexing. I mean, this goes back, from, decades back with speaker phones, the whole duplexing when people can't talk at the same time. One of my favorite things to do when you're in person, in the same room together, is you can interrupt each other, and that's not a bad thing. You always need to give everyone a chance to say, what they need to say, but it's okay to interrupt and say, wait, I don't understand what you're doing there. I'm not following this at all. Can you explain that back? If I wait until you finish, I mean, I can even think of, several times in this conversation where one of us has gone on and they made like 5 great points. I can't even remember each of them because we're so much more formalized and structured. So what I will say, and this goes back to what you were asking before, is how do you apply these things? Is, to me, the very first area to nurture is your relationships. And that sounds so cliche, of course, but it is so not done. And what happens is when you really nurture your relationships, when you really love each other, and I'm not talking romantic love, it's not family love. I'm just talking about love and valuing the people that you're with because you know them, you understand them, they know you, they get you, they know that you're not just this, engineer working on this one product line. It's that you also like making beer at home and you like going for walks and bird watching, or you're a runner, or you like to, needlepoint, or whatever it is. The more you know about someone, the more you tend to care about someone. And even if you don't really care about them, at least you can respect them. And that is how we get to this quote, psychological safety. But to me, the psychological safety, psychology or psychological, it means mental and emotional. I think we need to separate these out. If we keep lumping them together, the emotional so often gets lost. We need to nurture the emotional health. It's not that I can't do the design drawing and that's causing me the mental pain. It's if I can't do the design drawing, then people might think less of me. I might not have as much value on my team or in the organization, which means I don't feel loved. And if I don't feel loved, then I'm going to be afraid. This is where fear comes up. I'm going to be afraid to share my ideas. But what are we most often afraid of? Most often we're afraid of shame, judgment, degradation, or neglect. Yeah. I mean, how many bosses don't even listen to their employees? How many students don't feel heard by their teacher? In a classroom of 30 kids, not everyone's going to get a chance to be heard.
Right.
And that hurts. And like what Hannah, you were talking about earlier about physical pain and emotional pain, there's studies that show the human brain cannot distinguish between physical pain and emotional pain.
Exactly.
All your brain knows is I'm in pain, do something about it right now.
Yeah, physical and emotional pain both register in the same area of the brain in the same way. And that's part of what Dr. Lieberman talks about in that TEDx talk about social connection in the social brain, how pain is pain to the brain, whether that is the pain of rejection or the pain of a hurt knee because you fell on the stairs, right? In the brain, it registers in the same way. And so, we're afraid of experiencing pain, right? Period.
Right. And when we've experienced that in the past, this is why we get anxious about experiencing it again in the future. Yeah. I'm not going to speak up if I know my ideas are going to get put down, and not just my ideas, but people might think less of me, which means I won't be loved, which means I won't belong. So we do anything for that love and connection and belonging, even when we know it might hurt us, like binge drinking in a fraternity or something, even though we know in our frontal lobe that this is not a good idea, we do it anyway because in our midbrain, we want to belong. And if we never felt like we belonged somewhere before, like, I don't know, maybe in our family, then we're going to do whatever we can to belong to this peer group or at work or whatever. Yeah. And before people get all up in arms about, oh, I love my kid, and I believe you. I believe 100% that you completely, unconditionally love your child, but that's not what your child's receiving. And when we judge our child, this is what I grew up with. I grew up with all kinds of criticism and judgment. I mean, I grew up where if I got a 93 on a test, my parents would say, why didn't you get 100? If you would have done what we said, you would have gotten 100. What are you going to do about that now? I just needed to be, seen and heard and just loved because of what I did do. Yeah. Not because I didn't do it their way.
Right. And that is
judgment.
That's the fundamental human need, to be seen, unheard, understood, or valued, right? Sometimes we're not.
All of that translates to
we
love.
Can still be we can still value even if we don't understand. Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, then to be understood, when we seek to understand each other. But even if we don't fully understand another, we can still value them. We can see them, we can hear them, and we can let them know that we saw them and heard them. So I would say, as we start to wrap up and talk about, what are some practical calls to action for leaders, right?
Well, that's a great segue, because, we know from the research, and this is very strong research, that 75% of people quit their job because of their boss or management, right? Is it because the boss is 20 pounds overweight? Is that why they quit their job? Is it because the boss didn't take 10,000 steps that day? Is that why they quit their job? Is it because the boss doesn't have a standing desk? Is that why they quit their job? These are all the normal things we do in the wellness industry does to try and improve productivity and all. Is that why someone quits their job? No. They more often quit their job is because they don't feel heard or valued or understood by their boss or management. So it goes right back to the relationships. This is something that you can start doing today, is take the time, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but it needs to be intentional, and it needs to be authentic and genuine and sincere. Get to know your employees and let them get to know you as a person, not just because of what you do, and not just because you can create the best marketing plan ever. Who are you as a person? I want to get to know each other as people, and let's develop a real rapport, strengthen the relationship, and then we won't feel so uncomfortable, having a bad idea or sharing any idea or asking a question because you don't understand. It all starts with the relationships. And by the way, the retention at your organization is going to be skyrocketing when everybody feels heard and valued.
Yeah, that's the foundation, right? Create a culture where we care about each other. We have a culture where it's okay to share ideas. We're not going to get fired for making a mistake. We're going to have a culture where we can try things and fail. And we understand that trying and failing is part of innovation, right? So we have to be able to have the permission to try things with the expectation that it may not work. And
oh my God, absolutely.
Right. But always be looking for, how can we create that safety so that people feel like they can bring their whole selves to work, care about the relationship, build the relationships, and foster that emotional health for our people. And then back to the going off task, right? Do we have that freedom to go off task and create the space?
And what is that freedom? That is trust, right?
Yeah. Right.
Do you trust your employees enough to say, hey, do what you need to do. I trust you to get your job done. Mm-hmm. It's like we need to flip our value system around. What we're valuing is still from the industrial age, is the only way you're valued is by your productivity, mm-hmm. or how much money you bring into the organization. Our value system is just completely upside down. When we start valuing relationships as the number one priority, things will take off. Talk about not just, accomplishing goals, but really thriving. That is when people will thrive and organizations will thrive.
Yeah. Ben, what are your thoughts in terms of some specific things that leaders can do to foster a culture where creativity and innovation can flourish?
Yeah, I really like that turn that Kevin just made of that it's about trust. And I think that comes across in all sorts of ways. And I'm just even kind of thinking back right now to some coaching calls that I've had recently with people who were in kind of situations where they didn't have trust and weren't necessarily willing to just put that idea out there. And so that seems like a key is trust, which it's an easy word to say. Like it's a big thing to build that culture of trust, but it seems like it just starts with, taking those small steps, like you said, Kevin, of, don't shut down the idea when it first comes up. Like let people have those ideas, let people go off topic and not always have to bring it back and trust them to do their work. Like all of those things that I think a lot of us know, but do we actually do them?
And we don't tend to trust people that we don't know very well.
Right.
There's research that says a parent will hire a babysitter of, the 13-year-old, person down the road who they know the parents and they know the 13-year-old. So they'll let them be a babysitter when they have no experience, but some stranger off the street who has who's a nurse practitioner and has 20 years of experience, but I've never seen or met them or don't know anybody who knows them. I'm not going to hire that person, even though they're way more qualified.
Yeah.
But I hire the person that I know and I trust them.
Because I trust them. I trust them because I know them. Yeah.
I trust them because I know them.
Right. And then Ben, what you just mentioned, that's really, a great way to wrap here, because the seventh practice or seventh area to nurture in Kevin's book is this ability to allow yourself to explore ideas wherever and whenever they occur, right? That increases the likelihood that we're going to come up with creative solutions. So again, as leaders, allowing for that space, right, to explore ideas where it's not always just about the doing and creating the tasks or getting the tasks done. I was listening to a guided meditation this morning around, and the exploration was around creating space. And how do we create space in our lives? And do we immediately fill empty space with something because we're so used to that there's something there, whether it's a space on our calendar or, space in our lives in general, right? Because I think that space, back to the previous concept, Kevin, of going off task, that's what that free space, that downtime, that unfocused time is what allows the subconscious to connect weaker connections in the brain, right? When the executive function of the brain, the frontal lobe, the critical analytical thinking part of the brain, when that's very active, we're not as apt to have those flashes of insight and the innovative ideas, right? They come from, we've been working on this problem, we've been doing, all the things to try to come to a solution. It's not quite there, then we go off and do something completely different where we're not focusing. Often people have their best ideas in the shower, when they're on a walk, when we're about to fall asleep. And to close this out, Kevin, maybe you tell that story of when you fell asleep on somebody and came up with a great innovation.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, so I totally agree. Our subconscious mind is basically a record of everything that's happened in our life, from what we understand. And it's always working on everything in the background. And it's in those, it's actually like a theta wave pattern of your brain. This is chapter 6 of the book, where you can bridge the subconscious to the conscious mind. And when everything's working in the background, it's when we let it relax and we don't have to do, right? Be productive and busy all the time, that the information that your subconscious has been working on transfers over to your subconscious, and then you can bring it out. You can write it down. You can tell it to another person. You can record it, whatever that is. So yeah, bridging the subconscious to the conscious mind. Well, and an even quicker story is the idea for this book actually happened from a dream of, I got to get these ideas out. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I just started recording on my Google speaker at home. In the middle of the night, I was just recording ideas. And then, within a day or two, I had a whole outline for the book, and I knew a story for every chapter, and the whole thing came to be. That's a quick story of striking while the iron is hot and the subconscious mind working, right, while sleeping. But I had the speaker to record. But there have been many, many times when I've been in the office with a colleague and we're working on something, and maybe my colleague is usually, again, Larry McClintock, world-class designer, is drawing on the whiteboard, and I'm just dozing off. You know, I mean, 2:00 in the afternoon, food coma, whatever it is, hard workout that morning, and I'm dozing off. And then in a flash, I get an idea about whatever he's talking about. Or in this particular example, it's something that another team, a problem that they've been having from, a week or two ago that they'd shared with me that my subconscious had been working on. And while I was dozing off listening to Larry, it came to me and I was able to say it. He was able to write it down, draw it out. And that was a problem that the team had been working on for 2 years that got solved in that dozing off, at the office. And they tried the idea and it passed testing on the first try. And that whole project took off from there.
That's amazing. Yeah. So what can come from creating space? So I encourage all you leaders out there, create space for yourself, white space, and allow for white space for your team. Work on creating strong relationships and foster emotional health, because that will give room to creativity. All right. Absolutely. This has been such a fascinating conversation, Kevin. We really appreciate having you. How can people get in touch with you?
I think the easiest way is my website is kevinrstrauss.com. Strauss is like Levi Strauss or Johann, no relation. Definitely on LinkedIn. You can find me. My URL is really long, but Kevin Strauss, innovation, emotional health. And the business that I run is an app for social connection, an app for actually improving relationships called Uchi, which is spelled UCHI. And the website is uchiconnection.com. So it's very easy to connect with me through either of those websites or LinkedIn.
Wonderful. And Kevin is available for consulting in these areas of innovation and emotional health, to facilitate workshops. So we encourage you to reach out and connect with Kevin. And if you want to learn more about the work that we do here at Purpose and Performance Group, go to our website, purposeandperformancegroup.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Our podcasts are also released on YouTube, and you can subscribe there as well if that's your preference. With that, we want to just say thank you, Kevin, for coming today. Thank you, Ben, for being in our virtual studio today with us and for helping to produce this podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo, and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love, available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.